What is up, everybody? This is the Wild Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Heskett, and this is episode 101. All right. We have another solo episode, so you're stuck with me again today. No guest. I think the reason I wanted to do this is it's a good time to talk about relationship with food. With the holiday right around the corner, literally a few days away, at least I know we have a few Canadian listeners, so the American Thanksgiving holiday is on Thursday for those of you listening from Canada. But we have Thanksgiving coming up, and even if you don't, if you're Canadian or it's not a big holiday for you, maybe you don't really go and visit family or anything, we still have Christmas and stuff, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate in December coming up as well. So generally this means lots of food, lots of alcohol, and if you have a poor relationship with food, a lot of stress and internal conflict going on. And the reason I thought of this topic was we had a community call, and if you're not part of the No BS Fitness and Nutrition Tips Made Simple, go down to the show notes, join the group. We do a community call every single Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time and 6 Central, and what is that, 4 Pacific? But there's always the recording. So anyways, as I was saying, the reason for that was on that call we talked about reverse dieting, and I chimed in with the way I work with a reverse diet is when you go through that process, which is actively increasing your food in a controlled manner to maintain and or lose weight. So you're either doing it before a diet to help optimize your metabolism and hormones, or you're doing after a diet. So before a diet to lose weight, after a diet to maintain your weight, increase your metabolism, because there's something that's called metabolic adaptation, where there is a slowing in the metabolism when you do diet, especially for an extended period of time. So going through that process, you're reducing calories, metabolism slows down. So now we're doing the opposite. We're increasing calories in a controlled manner. And you kind of get to a point when you go through a reverse diet where you're not really going to increase protein. Like if you weigh 150 pounds and you're going to want to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, you're going to eat 150 grams of protein. There's not really much in the way of benefits of going above that. In fact, majority of benefits are going to be 0.7 to 1 grams of pound per 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, or your goal weight if you have a lot of weight to lose. You can go above it, but generally you don't really see much in the way of benefits. Like there's not a huge trade-off, so only do that if it makes you literally feel good. Like if some people just need more B vitamins and eating more protein might make you feel better. So if that's the case, you can eat more. It's not going to hurt you, but it's not necessarily going to benefit you. So you can stop eating more protein. And fats kind of level out too. Like I like a higher fat diet, but at a certain point you get to a point where you're just like, I don't want to eat all this fatty, heavy food, especially like summertime. So for me, I usually stop my reverse diet about 100 grams of fat. I have women who are eating also 100 grams of fat. I think my wife, when she's about maintenance, is about that too. She has PCOS, so her carbs are lower. But you kind of get to this point where fats and protein are leveled out. And from there, all you're doing is increasing carbs. Like, okay, we're going to increase 100 calories this week. It's another 25 grams of carbs. 4 calories per 1 gram of carbs. So that's another 25 and another 25. You keep going until you hit maintenance and figure out what your maintenance is. So your weight's not really fluctuating that much, and you just keep increasing. So I've had women go from eating about 120 grams of carbs a day to over 250 grams of carbs per day, maintaining their weight easily. And this isn't like a young person participating in half marathons. This was person I'm thinking of specifically. She's a realtor who works full time. She's a mom of 2, I believe. And she likes working out. So she works out 5 to 6 days per week because she likes it. And she's pretty active with her steps, but she's mid 40s, mid to late 40s. So not like someone super young, which is always like, well, if someone's older, no, she has that. She's had some health issues in the past, and we're able to get her there. She's going through menopause, all that stuff, eating 225 to 250 grams of carbs per day, plenty of fat, plenty of protein. So she doesn't feel like she has any restriction. Her restriction is, man, I have to hit these carb numbers. This is tough. But when she does, her workouts are amazing. So when she goes to a diet in the future, this is what I'll do too. When you're eating like that, all you do is reduce the portion of carbs. When you go into a dieting phase, you can kind of keep your fats and your protein relatively the same. Fats will come down eventually, but that initial diet, the initial part where you're cutting, and if you only need to do, say, a 4 to 6 week diet, you might only pull carbs. You're going to eat to a certain point, and then you're going to reduce your carb intake to, say she's eating 250, she might just slash that to 200 or 175. So 175 would be about a 300 calorie deficit, right? Am I doing mental math right? About 300 calorie deficit. That might be all she does. And maybe she does pull a little bit of fat. But basically, you're just going to increase carbs during maintenance, performance phases, times where you really want to build muscle, you increase carbs. Times you want to lose fat, you just reduce the amount of carbs in your diet. But what you're actually eating doesn't change that much. It's just the portions that you're eating change. So when you're dieting, you're going to reduce carbs. So you might need to bump up the veggies to get enough volume in. And then when you're not dieting, those carbs are going to bump up. You might not have enough room in your stomach to eat all those veggies. Veggies are still important. But you're eating so much that you don't necessarily need a ton of veggies. So you're eating the same things, just different portions. And I said it like this, and Alex on the community call was like, yeah, that's right. However, you have to get to that point mentally to be able to do that, because it is that easy when you get to that point. But we've all been so mentally fucked by society and diet culture with, here's what you eat when you're dieting, and it's like complete change of food. And here's what you eat when you're not dieting, and it's like bullshit food. And there's no in between. There's no middle ground, because ultimately the middle ground is like the 80-20, 90-10 rule, where like mostly unprocessed food with, like, we had some leftover popcorn balls from Halloween, and they are delicious. They have like this like sugar coating that holds them together. They're delicious. I had some for lunch. And then last night I made pumpkin cornbread, because we have 300 pounds of pumpkin that I grew this year, eating pumpkin. And so we've given some away, but mostly we have all that. So I need to use pumpkin up. And it's going into, Eloise actually loves it for her dog food, so she gets a little scoop. There's a big old freezer gallon bag of it in the fridge right now. So I'm just giving her a little bit each day. But I was like, okay, I'm going to make some pumpkin cornbread, because we need to use it up. And we had pumpkin puree, and literally, like, we're going to be so pumpkined out by February when spring veggies slowly start to come in. But that's kind of the goal. Goal is to be so sick of winter veggies that we're looking forward to spring, which is one way you can actually improve your relationship with food. We're going to come back to that. We're going to dog ear that, put that bookmark there. We're going to come back to that. Because I think that's something that's important, a different mindset shift you can have when it comes to food. But the first thing, when we're improving our relationship with food, one, we have to remove, like, you need to track macros. Because a lot of times we will think that we have this great intuitive ability, like, I know myself. And most people don't. Most people don't know hunger cues, because you've been so mentally fucked by everything going on. And then if your metabolism is dysregulated, if your hormones are out of whack, you don't know what the proper cues are. Because a lot of times what happens when we go through a reverse diet process and we actually fix your hormones and metabolism, fix is the wrong word, we bring them back to where they should be in your normal baseline, you're actually hungrier. You're like, what? Because your body's no longer stressed. Because during a dieting phase, you secrete more cortisol, more stress hormone than when you're at maintenance calories. So if you're always eating 1,200 calories, 1,000 calories, 800 calories, you're always pumping out cortisol, and that's to help energize you in the short term. This is why some people do fasting or they really cut calories out, and they're like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 3 weeks. I've never felt better. Ask that person week 6 or week 8 how they feel. Short-term cortisol and adrenaline, both are usually released at the same time. They are going to give you more energy. They suppress your appetite. Why? Survival situation. You are hungry out in the wilderness. You're in a hunter-gatherer society. What is going to give you good decision-making skills? Probably not think about your stomach while you're on the hunt. Probably not think about your stomach while you're gathering food. What you want that cortisol and adrenaline pumping out to give you energy, because it'll help break down, it helps put glucose into the bloodstream. It helps break down fatty acid in the short term, like when you're exercising. But then we want to go away. So we do something, we get food, it goes away. Unfortunately, most of us just try to have it pumping out all the time, and then we crash. So that's where, ask someone how they're doing in week 6 to 8. Generally, they've fallen off, they've stalled out, they've burnt out. It's just not good. So if you feel good in the short term, a lot of times that's why. And that's like great. If it's a sustainable program, build habits. Don't white knuckle it, not be like, okay, well, I feel amazing. I'll never change. I'm like, yeah, right. So anyways, we need to develop a good relationship with food. We need to eat food without anxiety. And if you're in a dieting phase, or maybe you just have a bad relationship with food and we're coming up to Thanksgiving and you have this black and white good food versus bad food, or fat causes fat gain, or carbs cause fat gain, anything like that. If you have a black and white view of nutrition, it is bad. Nutrition is very nuanced. There's a lot of things we still don't know about it. There's a lot of genetic components. There's still things being found out about food. But in general, we do know that 99% of people do very well with protein, carbs, and fat. And if you think you're that 1%, you're probably not. Like, usually there are the people living at the extremes, like the Eskimos. So unless you're like over 51% Eskimo, we're not having this conversation. So most people do very well with a mixed diet. The nuance of, glucose causes, when you eat sugar, causes your blood sugar to rise, glucose, and that causes an insulin response. That stops fat burning. Well, guess what? Insulin is also responsible for optimizing your thyroid function. Guess what keeps your metabolism running fast? Insulin helps with that, which is carbs. Now, there's a insulin response from eating protein as well. It's not as strong, but in general, it's eating carbs. So there's a very nuanced approach with it. And people will be like, well, if you're burning carbs, then you can't burn fat. And the way your body functions, think of, you have protein, carbs, and fat in your body to use as energy. And protein's really hard to use for energy. But think of everything like 3 different faucets. And you never completely turn one off. So even if you're in carb burning or fat burning mode, you're still burning some carbs in fat burning mode, and you're still burning fat in carb burning mode. You never fully go to one system or the other. You're always using all systems. It's just which one are we really opening that nozzle and which one are we pulling back on. So if we think of like 100%, like 100% is the maximum amount. If we're like doing sprints, it might be 90% carb metabolism, but then it might be 9% fat, 1% protein. Well, then as soon as you stop the sprint, which might be 10 seconds, and you rest for 3 minutes, it goes to 95% fat, 4% carb, and 1% protein. So your body's always functioning in this capacity. Same thing if you get insulin that rises, blood sugar rises, what happens? It's going to store your carbs, your blood sugar, and it's going to store it in the liver. It's going to store it in your muscles. And if those areas are completely full or you have some insulin resistance, it might convert it to body fat. But if you're in a calorie deficit, it doesn't matter that some of that got stored because you are burning off body fat faster than you are storing it. So there's a net negative, and that's where the weight's coming off. And why people who are like, you can't burn fat when bullshit. It doesn't matter that a little bit. Your body's burning X amount of energy. So let's say you burn 100 calories per hour, and in that hour you stored 80 calories. Guess what? You're still net negative 20 calories. So it doesn't matter that it stops fat burning. Well, where do those 20 calories that burned off come from? Well, it has to come from somewhere. Body doesn't want to break down protein. That's like last resort. It can break down other carbs, but with insulin, it's storing them. So where's it go? Oh, okay. And generally, if you're not doing anything that's high intensity exercise, your brain uses up a lot of sugar. But if you're not doing anything high intensity exercise, you're burning mostly body fat. Me talking to you right now through this podcast, like 99% of the energy my body is burning right now is fat. Fat is for slower processes. When you're sitting, standing, you're going for your walk, stuff like that, you're burning mostly fat up into the point where your heart rate starts to get up above like kind of like that zone 2. So it's slowly, I'm talking about those nozzles, like it slowly goes from like 99% fat to 90% fat, and the carbs coming up, then it's like 85% fat, carbs coming up, 75% fat, carbs coming up, and you keep going the higher intensity you go. So if you do a HIIT class, it's mostly carbohydrate metabolism you're doing, which is why carbs are important. Because if you've ever done like keto and you try to do HIIT, it's kind of like you can't get this other gear. You're like, I know I can work out harder, I just can't for some reason, because you don't have the fuel there. Also, side note, your brain burns up like 50 grams of carbs per day, just your brain alone. It might be 100. I don't remember. It's 50, somewhere between 50 to 100 grams of carbs per day your brain will use. Your liver will store like 100 grams or slightly more if you're a bigger person, grams of carbs per day, and that gets used up. Usually it's pretty empty by the end of the night. So you will store glycogen, and then your muscles store a ton of glycogen. 2, 3, 4, 500, up to like 800 grams of glycogen can be stored in your muscles. That's all carbs. So if those stores are never at full capacity, your body's super lazy. It's going to push carbs into those storage areas rather than turning into fat. And then you still have to use carbs to be burned off by your brain for its normal functions. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it's going back to that, creating that relationship with food. When you realize like, hey, like this is a more nuanced conversation. It's not as simple as some of these salesy influencers make it out there, who are always selling some sort of supplement or something, or they're investing in companies. It's not that as simple as they make it. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like an algebra equation. And you're like, oh, I don't do numbers. Well, that's the conversation. And that's why it's hard. You don't see a ton of people with massive followings who do have those more nuanced conversations. Someone like Layne Norton, he's built his following. It's taken him over a decade. I remember seeing Layne back in college, and he's taken forever to build up a following, which some of these salesy people can build up within like a few months or a year. He's taken a decade. So because he actually gives a nuanced conversation with research rather than carbs cause insulin to go up, that stops your fat burning. So here's my process. of how to get insulin low and burn body fat off super quick. If someone says that and you're like desperate to lose weight, you're like, I'm listening to that person, not okay, new research shows that eating a balanced diet is best for long-term sustainability. Like, scroll past. That's the reality of things on social media. But the person number 2 is right. And so, one, when you're building your relationship with food, it's to remove those people from your social media feed. Get rid of them. You don't need to listen to them. 2, it's eat foods 80 to 90% whole, minimally processed foods. And we can go into, we actually had a client where we had to talk about like process, and they're like, well, everything's a process. And I think you know what we mean when we say minimally processed, but processing is going to be on a spectrum from whole, basically single ingredient foods like chicken breast, kale, rice. And even then we can, white rice is fortified, so it's not necessarily single ingredient, but this is where it's a nuanced conversation. That white rice would be, say, fortified white rice would be right down from single ingredient food of, like, say, chicken breast, which, again, so someone might say that's more processed than a whole chicken. So with this, there's a continuum. So we're going to go along this route where it's, okay, whole chicken, chicken breast, white rice that's fortified, and then we might get into like something a little bit more processed, but still kind of healthy, and something a little bit more processed, and then we ultimately get to highly processed, like white flour, white sugar, where it's like, it's not great for you, but in small amounts, it's also not going to hurt you. And you need to live within that spectrum of, hey, like, we're going to mostly be on this side, minimally processed, but occasionally reaching over and having some cookies, holiday cookies coming up, some pumpkin pie, apple pie, this cake, whatever it is. I know my wife's family always does pizzelles. Whatever it is, occasionally having those things is not going to hurt you. It's not going to derail you. And if you overeat it, now you've learned a lesson. Okay, I tend to overeat these foods. For me, this is chocolate. And chocolate needs to be in very small quantities in the house when I'm dieting. Why? Because it's very easy for me to overeat. So if I overeat that, I'm going to go over my calories. I'm not going to reach my goal. So we can't buy the Costco bag of chocolate chips. I'm going to absolutely devour it. We tend not to buy too much in the way of alcohol because it's very easy for us to drink it. So we're not buying, even though I have the super nice bar setup, we don't buy that much alcohol anymore because, one, it's freaking expensive. Two, we drink it way faster than we should. So we don't. We buy it occasionally. We buy wine for mostly cooking, and then we'll drink that. But we limit things that we enjoy that are going to be easily accessible because we know we can overdo those things, but we don't stop those things. Because whenever we say we can't have something, it makes you want it more. You want more and more and more. And some people can sometimes, if you're a parent, this is something that you need to be aware of. Some people get so scared of food that they're like, doesn't matter. I don't crave that anymore. I don't want it. Therefore, it's not going to be in my house, and my kids are never going to be exposed to it. Here's the problem. Eventually, the kids leave the house, and they need to learn the skills to manage is manage the right word? They need to learn the skills to eat food in a way that they can regulate it. They can have moderation. Moderation's the word I'm looking for. They can have moderation when it comes to food. I saw this with one of my friends / roommates in college, where once I met him, he was a very big dude, huge into gaming, think like a 6'4" gamer dude back in like 2011. Like, he was like 250. It's like, okay, okay, like, it is what it is. And just ate whatever. It was like, okay, I guess he never was taught, like, eat really healthy, no big deal. No, 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 no. His mom was a massive health fanatic, and he was a wrestler. So he was actually like 130 pounds in high school. And then a few years in college, he blew up. But he would just be given like a can of tuna, like a high school boy, a can of tuna for lunch, or this for lunch. And that was just his norm. That wasn't like wrestling season with the crazy shit that they would do. That was just like the year-round diet, like super strict, no sugar, no this, no that, no blah, blah, blah. He gets to college, and all of a sudden it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Unlimited ice cream, cookies, desserts, everything. Fried chicken multiple times a week, burgers every single day of the week. You can get, it is a all-you-can-eat buffet at the regular cafeteria, and they have late night every single night where you can go and get pizza. They have pancakes every single morning. So if you have never taught your kids moderation, all of a sudden these foods that were off limits, they're going to, maybe not at first, maybe they'll be like, I'm not going to eat it that much. But they have no skills. They've, in their 18 to 28, but well, college age is 18. So 18 years of life, you've never taught them moderation. So now they just go crazy. Like the hits, and that they get that dopamine hit. One of doing something bad. I don't get this at home. I need to eat all of it because I don't get a chance to ever eat this. Once I go back, I won't get a chance. So I need to try and eat all of it, eat as much as I can. And he gained over 100 pounds. Is this an extreme example? Yes. But it is an example where you do need to set a good example for your kids if you're a kid or you have kids or thinking about having kids. Ice cream, treats, things like that. They're a normal part of society. Their friends are going to have these foods. Influences outside of you. And no matter how hard you try, you're not going to have full control over every single person who influences your child. Or maybe this is you and your social circle where you're like, I want to cut out all these things. And you have a social circle who eats a bunch of crappy food. Okay, well, you need to figure out how to moderate that. You need to learn those skills. And that's going to come from sometimes overeating or identifying foods that shouldn't be in the house, you can't be around, or you're going to just have them as special treats. For example, we don't do ice cream a ton in the house. We go out summer, sometimes once a week, to get ice cream, and we give our daughters some. But if we go out, we create a special treat. A lot of times it's after hiking or something, or working in the yard all day. It's hot, like we've been active all day. It's like, okay, we're going to go out, have a treat. Holidays. We don't make like pumpkin pie outside the holidays, really. But pumpkin pie, I love pumpkin pie. So it's a treat for the holidays. We don't do desserts we do desserts a little bit more, but we moderate with my daughter where it's like, hey, like you can have a dessert. Here's a cookie. And we always do like the smaller size cookie. And if they're like, we buy them for whatever reason, they're the massive ones, we'll either cut them in half or quarter them. Like we're teaching her moderation from early on. And the same thing can apply to you. If you find foods that you tend to overeat, like ice cream, say buy ice cream bars that are already pre-portioned for you, and you're going to have one. And if you eat the whole packet, it's gone. But the whole packet's going to be less calories than the whole container of ice cream. Like a whole thing of Ben Jerry's is like 1,000 calories. But if you get a thing of like some of the little ice cream bars, which might be 100, 150 calories, you eat 5 of them that are in there, that's half the calories basically. So you're going to learn to moderate over time. And then it's like, oh, I want more. Well, I'm out for the week. And yes, we're adults. We can go buy. But if you're serious about this, you won't. You're going to be like, well, nope, I'm out for the week. So I'm not going to go and get any because you're an adult and you're learning how to moderate yourself and improve your relationship with food. You don't need that instant dopamine hit of ice cream or chocolate. You ate all of it. Now you get a weight. And next week, you're going to learn, maybe I shouldn't do that. And this is something I did with chocolate a long time ago. If I buy one chocolate bar and that's it for the week, then I'm going to make it last throughout the week. And if I'm really stressed and I eat half of it, I choose that. But I know that tomorrow I might not be able to have any more. Or if I eat half the bar on Wednesday, I'm not going to have any for Thursday, Friday. And you start to make these connections of like, this food's okay to eat, but I'm only going to have X amount. I'm not going to eat all of it. I'm going to have limited amount. Because they're very hyper palatable. And it used to be that they weren't readily available all the time. Now they're readily available and relatively cheap. So you can create this connection. This food's okay. It's not going to harm me. But I also know I tend to overeat these things. I tend to have a bad relationship with food. It causes me a little bit of anxiety. It's like, okay, it's not that bad. I'm just limiting myself. And there's going to be ups and downs. I'm not saying you're going to fix it this week. I'm not saying it's going to happen next week. It's going to take months, weeks, months to do. But you either start now or you keep going through this cycle where you're struggling with your relationship with food. So what do you want? Because the struggle with your relationship with food fucking sucks. So why don't we just start now? Okay. So backtracking. You know that pin we put into things when I said about the pumpkin being pumpkined out? So I want to bring that up with also your relationship with food and more like treating certain situations like celebrations. So this time of year, we have the holidays, big celebrations, lots of fun. Also times some people get derailed, but that should just be a normal part of life. Like, don't look at the holidays as like, oh my God, this is such a terrible time for dieting and my health. And no, this is a normal, it's going to happen every single fucking year for the rest of your life. Then we have Super Bowl where that's going to be in January or February. I don't really follow football, so I just know Super Bowl's in the January-ish. That derails a lot of January 1sters. Then we have St. Paddy's Day. We have Easter. We have... Is it Memorial Day? Or I always forget Memorial Day and Labor Day mixed up. One of those, end of school, 4th of July. Like, almost every single month has something in it. February has Valentine's Day. Usually doesn't derail most people. But something happens. And usually Valentine's Day also includes a little bit of exercise, at least. Just saying. So almost every single month has something that potentially could derail you if you have an all or nothing mindset. Holidays are a big part of that. With that being said, instead of looking at it as a stressful time, look at a time for, hey, this is a time where we get to celebrate. We get to have these certain foods I look forward to each year, and you can have them and be okay. For example, pumpkin pie, Christmas cookies. So I love these like chocolate crinkle cookies. I'm obsessed with them, but I only let my wife make them for Christmas. I tend to overeat them. She makes them. Once they're gone, they're gone. Maybe if it's before Christmas, she makes one more batch, but basically any other time of the year, I don't want them. They are for Christmas time. So you can celebrate. Most people only eat turkey once a year, unless you're doing turkey burgers. Most people don't eat turkey very often. Turkey's for Thanksgiving, maybe Christmas if you do Christmas as well. Sometimes it's ham, but there's certain foods where you're going to do that. And so instead of having very boring foods like the chicken, broccoli, and rice the rest of the time, you can also look at the season and kind of try to eat foods within the season. One, they're going to taste better. Two, you can generally support your local agricultural community by doing this, because you're going to go to a farmer's market, or that's going to be imported locally to the grocery store from local farms. And you can get better tasting food. But it's also like, hey, during these times of the year, this is when these foods taste best. So we're going in, apple and pear season are ending up here in Pennsylvania. We're going into citrus season. That means citrus is going to taste the best. Apples, pears still be good. But if you get peach this time of year, it's fucking awful. If you get watermelons, it's fucking awful. So we want to eat kind of like seasonal stuff. We can do that with your menu. So what I said was like by the time spring comes around, we're looking for like spring veggies. Like, yeah, like all of a sudden our menu changes to asparagus and mushrooms, and if we can get our hands on them, ramps and different veggies that are in the spring. They're grown in the spring. Cherries are a spring fruit. Strawberries, spring fruit. So we're eating things that are in the spring. Rhubarb, we change our menu to that. That's that time of the year. In the spring, we eat these foods. And then once they're gone, we have all these recipes we try for the spring. And then once it's gone, like spring's over, we break that out next year. And then summer comes along. Summer, we have peaches and all the nectarines, watermelon, cantaloupe, things like that, tomatoes, all these different, the majority of your veggies you tend to think of zucchinis, cucumbers. But then come fall, we have butternut squash and pumpkins, and then a lot of the brassicas or cruciferous vegetables are also taste way better in the fall, like kale, broccoli, cauliflower. So you rotate your menu like that, and then winter again, the cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, they tend to be sweeter, less bitter during the fall and winter months with the cooler temps. So you rotate your menu like that and creates this time where, hey, like I'm not eating broccoli 24/7, 365. I'm eating it generally more in spring because they taste good in the spring too. And I'm going to eat them in the fall. And this doesn't mean it has to be that like all the time. Like if you're like, I do like broccoli all the time, or I like the frozen bags of broccoli, like that's fine. But if you're trying to build a relationship with food and you're struggling a little bit, this can be a way you do it, of eating a little bit more seasonally, because it makes you look forward to food when it tastes the best. You're going to eat that, celebrate it, and then move on. Like, okay, well, now something else is coming into season. We only have so much in our budget or so much in our fridge for room for produce. And okay, now we're going to move on to summer and then fall, and then we're going into winter, and then repeat, it's going to be back to spring, and then you're looking for it. So it's also giving you that time, like usually those transition months, like for summer and fall, that's September. For spring, that's like usually May or June. Winter into spring for here. Well, I'm talking about Pennsylvania time frames. Of course, where you're listening to, that's going to be completely different. If you're not so we're zone 7. Are we 7A or 7B? Growing zone. We're zone 7 definitely, because I'm not too far from Chesapeake, but most of Pennsylvania is actually zone 6. So for those time frames, that's what we're talking about. So those transition months, you tend to you're like getting ready, you're like, it's not quite in. Well, like I'm kind of over these other things like tomatoes in the summer, but not quite. Like we want those other fall veggies, but it's not quite there. Maybe it's too hot. You're like, I really could go for butternut squash soup, but it's too hot for soup in September when it's 85 still out. So that's a way to build a relationship with food that's based on when things are coming about, almost doing a mini celebration, enjoying the transition of seasons, and then next thing you know, you're not really thinking about like, is this food good or bad? You're just like eating food the way it was meant to be grown, when it's supposed to be harvested, and enjoying it. And do we do this 100%? No. We have frozen veggies. We had corn and green beans that we froze last night for dinner, and Amelia devoured them. But that's also something you can do. Sometimes you want those foods that remind you of a different time of the year, and frozen veggies are great, or canned veggies can do the same thing. You can do that. I'm just saying, to help improve your relationship with food, start to transition your menu to that. Because a lot of people will just try to eat the same fruits and veggies all year round, and then they wonder why certain times of the year they suck. Or they wonder like, I'm so bored. What else can I do? And they're just used to going to hyper processed food, which tastes like pizza. Like you'll get bored eventually, but most people don't really get bored of it. So you're always just like, you're going to fall back to that. Instead, we can eat food that is in season, taste the best, you kind of want it to shine. So you don't want to like do too much to it that you can't actually taste the food. Kind of like with some frozen broccoli, you're like kind of like hiding the flavor a little bit. You're like, no, I want to eat it and actually taste it, because this is when it tastes the best. Of course, there's plenty of recipes where you mix things like butternut squash soup, which tastes amazing. Anyways, we're at 40 minutes, and speaking of which, I have to get to the farmer's market. So I hope this was helpful to you guys with figuring out your relationship with food. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me down below in the show notes. Just reach out to me on social media, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have when it comes to this. But as this is right before Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving if you are celebrating it, and I will see you guys in the next one. I don't know if there'll be a Friday episode, but there might be. If I have time to record one, there will be. But if not, I will see you guys next week.